The unexpected encounter. The sweet scent of ripening starfruit filled the evening air as Thomas Reed made his final inspection of the eastern field. With practiced hands, he adjusted the solar irrigation system, his weathered fingers moving with precision despite their callous state. 6 years on this frontier world had transformed him from a military medic into something else entirely, a man who coaxed life from alien soil rather than saving it on battlefields. "Come on, you stubborn thing," he muttered, tightening a loose connector on the irrigation pipe. The system hummed back to life, casting a soft blue glow across the unusual purple-tinged crops that stretched toward Proxima Colony's setting suns. Thomas straightened, wincing as his back protested. At 38, he wasn't old, but the combination of military service and farming had left its mark. He gazed across his 50 acres with quiet pride. Not bad for someone who'd arrived with nothing but medical knowledge and a desperate need for solitude. His farm sat nestled between rolling azure hills and a dense forest of silver-barked trees that locals called whisperings. The isolation had been deliberate. Thomas had chosen the plot furthest from the colony's main settlement, a good 3-hour hover ride away. After what he'd seen during the Centauri conflict, crowds made his hands shake and his breathing shallow. The homestead itself was modest, a prefabricated structure he'd expanded with local timber and stone, a barn for his equipment, and a small greenhouse where he experimented with medicinal plants. To anyone passing by, it looked like any other frontier farm. They wouldn't notice the reinforced walls or the military-grade security system camouflaged as weather monitoring equipment. Thomas collected his tools and began the walk back to the house. The twin suns cast long shadows across the property as they descended below the hills. Night approached quickly on Proxima Colony, and with it came the bioluminescent display of the native flora, another reason he'd chosen this isolated spot. The peaceful glow of the night plinths helped calm his mind when the memories came. He had just reached the porch when his security system vibrated against his wrist. Thomas froze, eyes scanning the perimeter. The alert was silent, his own modification, but the pattern indicated movement at the farm's edge near the forest boundary. Large movement, not the local wildlife. Thomas set down his tools and casually stepped inside, his relaxed posture belying the tension suddenly coursing through him. Once inside, he moved to a hidden panel behind a faded tapestry, retrieving a compact pulse rifle. Standard military issue, though he'd modified it extensively. Old habits died hard. The security display showed thermal imaging of the forest edge. A single humanoid figure stood at the tree line, seemingly observing the farm. The heat signature wasn't human, too concentrated in the core, barely registering in the limbs. Thomas had seen similar patterns during the war. Sci-fi. But what would one of their kind be doing here on a backwater agricultural colony? Thomas moved silently to the back door. Whatever this visitor wanted, he preferred to meet them away from his home. He circled around the barn, using the growing darkness and his knowledge of the terrain to approach undetected. The figure had emerged from the forest now, moving with fluid grace across the field. Even in the dim light, Thomas could make out the characteristic silver-blue skin and the ornate armor that identified members of the Visari warrior caste. The visitor was tall and lean, with a crest of darker blue filaments where a human would have hair. Definitely female, based on the armor configuration and physical proportions. Thomas positioned himself behind a storage shed, watching as she approached his home. Her movements were precise, measured military training was universal, it seemed. She carried what appeared to be a ceremonial staff, though Thomas knew from experience that Visari ceremonial weapons were just as deadly as their practical ones. She stopped in the open area before his house, her posture straightening as she called out in flawless English, "Thomas Reed, former combat medic of the Earth Alliance forces. I seek audience with you." Thomas's blood ran cold. No one here knew his full military background. He'd been careful, creating a new identity when he settled, sharing minimal details with the colony registry. Whoever this Visari was, she had access to classified information. "Most people knock," he replied, stepping out from his hiding place, rifle held loosely but ready. The Visari turned, her luminescent eyes solid amber with no visible pupils fixing on him. "I am Zephyra, third sentinel of House Varkath. I have come to assess the threat." "Threat," Thomas kept his distance, circling slightly to keep the setting suns behind him. "I'm just a farmer." Zephyra's head tilted slightly. "The records suggest otherwise. The Battle of Centauri Station. You were there when Commander Orvis fell." Thomas's grip tightened on his rifle. "Ancient history." "Not to my people." Zephyra's voice remained neutral, but Thomas detected subtle changes in her posture, weight shifting forward, hands adjusting their grip on her staff. "Legends speak of a human medic who defeated a squad of our elite warriors while unarmed. A human who appeared to anticipate their movements, who moved with impossible speed." Thomas gave a humorless laugh. "Sounds like typical war propaganda, exaggerated stories to boost morale." "Perhaps," Zephyra took a step forward, "I have been sent to determine the truth." "By whom?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer. "The Visari High Command believes the humans are developing enhanced soldiers, bioengineered, improved reflexes, accelerated neural pathways." She studied him with unnerving intensity. "You are either evidence of this program or living proof the stories are false." Thomas sighed. 6 years of peace shattered by old ghosts. "And how exactly do you plan to determine which it is?" The answer came in the form of sudden movement. Zephyra's staff swung toward him with blinding speed. Most humans would have been struck before they even registered the attack. Thomas wasn't most humans. He moved instinctively, his body sliding away from the strike with millimeters to spare. The defensive reaction was so deeply ingrained that conscious thought played no part in it. His rifle came up, but he hesitated. Firing would only escalate the situation. Zephyra pressed her advantage, launching into a complex series of strikes. Each missed by the narrowest margin as Thomas wove between them, his movements fluid and precise. He made no attempt to counterattack, focusing solely on evasion. "Fight back," Zephyra demanded, frustration creeping into her voice. "Show me what you are." "I'm a farmer," Thomas replied, ducking under another swing. "With good reflexes." The exchange continued across the yard, Thomas maintaining his defensive stance while Zephyra's attacks grew increasingly complex. To an observer, it would have looked like an elaborately choreographed dance. The Visari warrior executing perfect offensive forms while the human moved with impossible prescience, always just beyond her reach. Thomas felt the familiar sensation building within him, the heightened awareness, the world seeming to slow around him as his perception accelerated. It had saved his life countless times during the war, this unexplainable ability to process information faster than any normal human should. The military doctors had run countless tests, never finding a satisfactory explanation. Eventually, they'd stopped questioning and simply deployed him where his skills were most needed. "Enough," he said finally, catching Zephyra's staff between his hands with a precision that surprised even himself. For a moment, they stood locked together, the Visari's strength impressive but unable to break his grip. Their eyes met, and Thomas saw something shift in her expression, confusion giving way to fascination. "You are not using enhancements," Zephyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is natural for you." Thomas released the staff and stepped back. "I don't know what I am, never have." "Impossible," she breathed, though her tone suggested she was beginning to believe otherwise. "Our intelligence indicated." The conversation abruptly ended as Zephyra stumbled, her staff clattering to the ground. Thomas moved forward instinctively, catching her before she collapsed entirely. Up close, he noticed what he'd missed during their exchange, a darkened patch on her side where the armor segments joined, the distinctive smell of coagulating blood. "You're injured," he said, medical training immediately overriding caution. "Before you came here." Zephyra's eyes flickered, pride warring with reality. "An encounter with local wildlife. I underestimated its capabilities." "The crystal wolves," Thomas guessed, already supporting her weight as he guided her toward the house. "Their claws secrete a mild neurotoxin, non-lethal to humans, but I don't know how it affects Visari physiology." "You are helping me," Confusion colored her voice. "I was a medic before I was a soldier," Thomas replied simply. "And before either I was human. We tend to help injured people, even those who just tried to take our heads off." Inside the house, Thomas guided Zephyra to his examination table, another relic of his military days. The Visari warrior remained silent as he assessed her wound, her amber eyes tracking his every movement with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "The toxin's different in your system," he murmured, examining the readings on his scanner. "Slower acting but potentially more problematic. Your autonomous nervous system is showing signs of disruption." "Is it fatal?" Zephyra asked, her voice remarkably steady. Thomas shook his head. "Not if treated properly." He moved to a storage cabinet, retrieving various supplies. "Fortunately, I've been experimenting with local plant compounds. I think I have something that will neutralize it." As he prepared the treatment, Thomas felt Zephyra's gaze intensify. "You are a contradiction, Thomas Reed," she said finally. "Our records indicate you killed 17 Visari warriors at Centauri Station." Thomas's hands stilled momentarily. 14, and I didn't kill them, I incapacitated them. A distinction without difference in combat. A crucial difference to a medic. Thomas turned, meeting her gaze directly. "I've never taken a life, not even enemy combatants." Zephyra's expression showed clear disbelief. "Then how did you defeat our warriors?" Thomas applied the medicinal compound to her wound before answering. "I know anatomy, human, Visari, and a dozen other species. I know precisely where to strike to cause temporary paralysis, unconsciousness, or extreme pain without permanent damage. Knowledge many would use to kill more efficiently," Zephyra observed. "Not my way." Thomas began bandaging the wound. "The compound should start working soon. The paralytic effects will reverse within hours." Zephyra watched him work, her expression unreadable. "My mission was to determine if you were an engineered super soldier or merely the subject of exaggerated tales. You appear to be neither." Thomas smiled faintly, disappointed. "Intrigued," she corrected. "You move like no human I have encountered. Your reflexes exceed our highest measurements for your species, yet you claim no enhancements." "I can't explain it," Thomas said honestly. "The military ran every test imaginable. Genetic analysis, neural mapping, the works. Physically, I'm completely normal. They called it an evolutionary anomaly." Zephyra attempted to sit up, wincing slightly. "Perhaps not anomaly, perhaps potential." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The Visari have legends of the first ones, beings who could perceive reality differently, who could process information at accelerated rates." Zephyra's voice had taken on an almost reverent quality. "Most consider them myths, but some of us believe they indicate evolutionary possibilities within sentient species." "You think I'm some kind of evolutionary step forward?" Thomas laughed. "Trust me, I'm just a guy who's good at getting out of the way." "A skill that made you legendary among my people," Zephyra countered. "The unarmed human who defeated our best warriors without killing a single one. Many refused to believe the reports." Thomas finished securing the bandage. "Well, now you've seen for yourself. You can go back and tell them I'm just a farmer with questionable reflexes. Mystery solved." Zephyra's eyes narrowed. "I will require time to recover and to observe you further." "Observe me? I thought your mission was complete." "My mission is to assess the threat you represent," she replied. "I have not yet determined if your abilities can be replicated or taught to others, if humans could train soldiers to move as you do." Thomas understood her concern. The war had ended in an uneasy truce, both sides exhausted but undefeated, if either gained a significant advantage. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly. "You can stay until you're healed, but I'm not a lab specimen and this isn't a military facility. You follow my rules on my farm." Zephyra inclined her head in what Thomas recognized as a gesture of formal agreement. "Acceptable terms." As Thomas moved to prepare a space for his unexpected guest, he couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed isolation had just ended. Whatever came next would change everything, for him, for Zephyra, and perhaps for the fragile peace between their peoples. The twin suns had fully set now, leaving the room illuminated only by the soft glow of the night plinths outside the windows. In that ethereal light, Thomas caught Zephyra studying her own reflection in a polished metal surface, her expression contemplative. "Something wrong?" he asked. She turned those amber eyes toward him. "I came seeking a weapon or a myth. I found neither. Now I must determine what I did find." "Just a farmer," Thomas repeated his earlier claim, though even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. Zephyra's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "No, Thomas Reed, whatever you are, just a farmer is not it." Warrior's curiosity. Dawn broke over the frontier colony, casting a copper glow across Thomas's fields. He'd been awake for hours, tending to his crops with the diligence that had made his farm unexpectedly successful. The routine was familiar, comforting, but the presence of the Visari warrior observing him from the porch disrupted the peace he'd cultivated for 6 years. Zephyra stood with perfect posture despite her injury, her amber eyes tracking his movements. She had exchanged her formal armor for the simple attire Thomas had provided, practical clothing that hung loosely on her slender frame. Even dressed as a colonist, she emanated the unmistakable aura of a predator. "Your agricultural methods are inefficient," she called out as Thomas adjusted an irrigation valve. "Visari hydroponic systems would yield triple the harvest with half the effort." Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe, but I like getting my hands in the soil." "A peculiar preference?" Zephyra replied, descending the steps with a grace that belied her wounded state. The treatment had worked faster than Thomas expected. Visari physiology apparently responded well to his medicinal compounds. "How's the side feeling?" he asked, nodding toward her injury. "Functional," she approached, studying the purple starfruit with evident curiosity. "Your medicines are remarkably effective. Our field medics would value such knowledge." Thomas tensed slightly. "I'm not interested in helping anyone develop better battlefield medicine." "Yet you healed an enemy combatant without hesitation." Zephyra plucked a ripe fruit, examining its unusual structure. "Another contradiction." "You're not an enemy combatant," Thomas corrected, returning to his work. "The war's over. We're just two people with complicated histories." Zephyra bit into the fruit, her expression shifting from skepticism to surprise as the flavor registered. "This is unexpected." Thomas couldn't help smiling. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? "Pleasant," she admitted, "though the texture is disconcerting." The morning unfolded in similar exchanges, Zephyra questioning Thomas's methods and preferences, Thomas providing explanations that often left her more puzzled than enlightened. Her curiosity seemed genuine, extending beyond her military assessment to personal interest. By midday, they had fallen into an unexpected rhythm. Thomas worked the fields while Zephyra alternated between observation and cautious assistance, her precise movements making up for her unfamiliarity with farming tools. "These plants," she said, examining a row of blue-tinted herbs in the greenhouse, "they're not standard colony crops." Thomas glanced up from the seedlings he was transplanting. "Good eye. They're modified versions of Terran medicinal herbs adapted to local soil conditions." "For your medical work, it wasn't a question." "Old habits," Thomas admitted. "I keep expecting the nightmares to stop, but 6 years later," he shrugged. "The local clinic appreciates the supply." Zephyra's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The aftermath of combat affects Visari warriors similarly. We call it the echo of battle." "PTSD on Earth," Thomas said, though doctors had fancier terms for what I experienced. "Your accelerated perceptions," Zephyra guessed. "They continued after combat situations." Thomas nodded, surprised by her insight. "Sensory overload, everything too bright, too loud, too much. These herbs help dull the edge without clouding thinking." Zephyra approached, examining the plants more closely. "Our warriors use meditation techniques passed down through generations. Perhaps an exchange of knowledge would benefit both our peoples." "Is that what this is now?" Thomas asked. A cultural exchange program. A faint smile touched Zephyra's lips. My mission parameters allow for significant discretion. The conversation might have continued, but Thomas's security system suddenly vibrated against his wrist, the pattern indicating approaching vehicles. Multiple signatures moving fast. We have company, he said, instinctively moving toward the house. Not the friendly kind. Zephyra followed, her posture shifting instantly from curious visitor to combat-ready warrior. Visari. Unlikely, Thomas accessed the security display. 3 hover trucks, colony markings, probably harvesters. Explain, Zephyra demanded, retrieving her staff from where it rested against the wall. Resource raiders, they target isolated farms, steal crops and equipment, sometimes worse. Thomas opened the hidden panel, retrieving his pulse rifle. They shouldn't be a problem if they see we're armed. Zephyra's expression darkened. You would merely deter them, allow them to raid elsewhere. Not my job to police the colony, Thomas replied, though the words tasted bitter. The medic in him had never been good at walking away from problems. Then consider it mine, Zephyra stated, moving toward the door. Thomas caught her arm. You're injured, outnumbered, and on foreign soil. This isn't your fight. Amber eyes locked with his. I judged you by your actions yesterday. Will you now prevent me from taking similar ones? The hover trucks had stopped at the perimeter of the farm. 8 figures emerged, carrying a mixture of crude weapons and harvesting equipment. Their approach was casual, confident. They clearly didn't expect significant resistance. Thomas recognized their leader, a burly man called Decker who'd built a reputation for violence even before the colony was established. Rumors suggested he'd been military once, discharged for conduct that made even wartime atrocities seem mild. Reed, Decker called out as they approached. No hard feelings, but we're taking your harvest and equipment. Cooperate and we'll leave you breathing. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle visible but not aimed. Not happening, Decker. Turn around. The raiders laughed, spreading out in a practiced formation. 1 man, 1 gun, Decker sneered. Bad odds. 2, Zephyra corrected, emerging from the shadows of the porch. Her alien appearance gave the raiders momentary pause. Decker recovered quickly. Didn't know you were keeping exotic company, Reed. Maybe we'll take her too. Thomas felt rather than saw Zephyra tense beside him. Last chance, he offered, knowing it would be refused. Take them, Decker ordered, raising his own weapon. What followed happened so quickly that later, Thomas would have trouble recalling the exact sequence. His perception shifted, the world slowing around him as adrenaline triggered his unique ability. He registered Decker's finger tightening on the trigger, calculated trajectory and response time, then moved. 3 precise shots disabled weapons without injuring hands. 2 raiders fell unconscious from strikes to pressure points before they realized Thomas had closed the distance. Another found himself incapacitated by a nerve pinch that Thomas had perfected during the war. Zephyra moved like liquid lightning, her staff connecting with precision that matched Thomas's own. Where he disabled with medical knowledge, she immobilized with warrior expertise. Neither killed, though the opportunity presented itself multiple times. Decker, suddenly finding himself the last raider standing, fired wildly. Thomas sensed the energy pulse passing too close to Zephyra's injured side and reacted instinctively. His body intercepted the shot, absorbing impact meant for her. Pain blossomed across his shoulder, but his momentum carried him forward, delivering a precise strike that left Decker unconscious on the ground. Silence fell across the farmyard, broken only by Thomas's slightly labored breathing. You are injured, Zephyra observed, suddenly beside him. Thomas grimaced. Notice that, did you? You intercepted a shot meant for me. Her tone contained something unfamiliar, confusion tinged with what might have been concern. Medic's instinct, Thomas deflected, though they both recognized the explanation as insufficient. They secured the raiders with restraints from Thomas's medical supplies, arranging for colony security to collect them via the communication system. Throughout the process, Zephyra remained uncharacteristically quiet, her gaze repeatedly returning to Thomas's injured shoulder. Later, as twilight painted the sky in vivid purples and reds, she insisted on treating his wound, her slender fingers applying medicinal compounds with unexpected gentleness. "Your movements during combat," she said finally, securing a bandage with practiced efficiency. "They exceeded even yesterday's demonstration." Thomas winced as he tested the range of motion in his shoulder. Adrenaline. "No," Zephyra shook her head, her blue-tinged features set in determined lines. "I have studied combat physiology across 17 species. What you demonstrated exceeds established parameters for unaugmented humanoids." Thomas sighed, too tired to maintain pretenses. "I know. Yet you hide this ability, use it to grow plants." There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "What would you have me do?" Thomas asked. "Become a weapon, allow myself to be studied and replicated? I saw enough death during the war." Zephyra was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. "Among the Vaisari, those with rare abilities are considered Aizari, treasured ones. They become teachers, not weapons." "Earth doesn't work that way," Thomas replied bitterly. "Exceptional abilities get weaponized. It's practically a human tradition." "Perhaps that is why you chose isolation." Zephyra's hand remained on his bandaged shoulder, the contact strangely comforting. "But isolation brings its own costs." Thomas couldn't argue with that. 6 years of solitude had dulled the worst of his memories, but had done nothing to fill the emptiness that accompanied them. "Why did you intercept that shot?" Zephyra asked suddenly. "Your abilities would have allowed you to neutralize the attacker before he fired." Thomas met her amber gaze, surprised by the intensity he found there. "I didn't think, I just reacted." "To protect someone who came to assess your threat potential," she pressed. "Someone who, by your own assessment, considers you a potential weapon or enemy." "You're not an enemy," Thomas said simply. "Not anymore." Something shifted in Zephyra's expression, a softening around eyes that had seemed so alien just a day earlier. "The Vaisari have a concept called Jurai, the recognition of kindred spirit across boundaries of physiology and culture. It is rare, especially between species." "And you think that's what this is?" Thomas asked, suddenly aware of their proximity. "I think," Zephyra replied carefully, "that I came seeking a weapon and found something far more valuable." "A farming consultant?" Thomas suggested with a hint of his old humor. Zephyra's lips curved in what was definitely a smile. "A possibility." "For what?" "For understanding abilities our scientists have theorized but never documented, for bridging cultures that have known only conflict." Her hand moved from his shoulder to rest lightly against his face. "For connection beyond duty." The touch sent an unexpected current through Thomas, not the accelerated awareness of combat, but something equally powerful. 6 years of isolation had left him unprepared for the simple intimacy of the gesture. "Your mission," he began. "My mission was to assess and report," Zephyra acknowledged. "I will report that Thomas Reed poses no threat to the Vaisari, that his abilities are unique to him and cannot be weaponized against us." "And then," she continued, her voice taking on a resonance he hadn't heard before, "I will request extended diplomatic assignment to Proxima Colony to establish cultural exchange protocols with local inhabitants." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like permission to stay." "Unless the accommodations prove unsuitable," Zephyra replied, a challenge in her eyes. Thomas looked around at his isolated farmhouse, seeing it suddenly through new eyes. The solitude that had once been sanctuary now seemed merely empty. "I might need to build an addition," he said thoughtfully. "The greenhouse could use expansion too." "I have considerable experience with structural engineering," Zephyra offered, "and significant interest in your medicinal plants." "Cultural exchange," Thomas murmured, testing the concept. "Among other possibilities," Zephyra agreed. As night settled over the farm, the bioluminescent plants casting their gentle glow across the fields, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for the future. Whatever came next would be uncharted territory for both of them, filled with complications neither could fully predict. But for the first time since leaving Earth, the path ahead seemed worth exploring. A former combat medic with unexplainable abilities, and a Visari warrior seeking understanding rather than advantage, strangers just days ago, now bound by something neither culture had words to properly describe. Tomorrow, Thomas said, I could show you the western fields. I've been experimenting with some Visari grain varieties. Zephira's expression brightened with genuine interest. I would value that greatly. As they stood together on the porch, watching the night plinths illuminate the darkness, the galaxy beyond seemed less vast and hostile than it had just days before. Two individuals from worlds that had nearly destroyed each other, finding unexpected connection on a remote colonial farm. Perhaps not the story either would have chosen, but one with possibilities neither could have imagined alone.